I'm going to need y'all to be normal in the comments on this one. I adore Persona 3 Reload. I have not been able to put the controller down since I started playing it over a month ago. It is the perfect game to talk about on the show that you're watching now, Flow State, a show about the games we get lost in. In fact, I've had several moments this year of being sucked into a game like that, but Persona 3 Reload is the one that worked its way into my idle thoughts. It's a game that I want to yell at people about. I've bought merch for this game. I bought a physical copy of the game after I'd already finished it. I find myself listening to the soundtrack constantly. And I'd love to recommend Persona 3 Reload to all of my friends, but I can't, because Persona has a problem. You can love things and critique them. I swear I heard that line in a John Green video years ago, but every time I go try and find it, I can't find where he said it. But this idea that you can love something and critique it is core to my being now. Like, I believe that not only is it possible to love something and to critique it, but that doing so is the responsible way to be a fan. So I'd love to recommend Persona 3 Reload or any Persona game to you without caveat, but I'm not going to do that. There's just so many unforced errors present across the series, even in a remake that removes and addresses some of the series' previous problems. If you're a big Persona fan and you're looking for a comprehensive take on the series, that's not what I'm going to do here. My experience with the games is limited to about half of Persona 5 Royal, a few hours of Persona 5 Tactica, and the entirety of Persona 3 Reload. If you want a more detailed view of some of the issues that I'm going to talk about here, I really recommend the video Is Persona Gay from Garfield Kermit. This video, though, is about my experience with Persona, the ways it draws me in, and also the ways that it lets me down. So before we critique Persona 3 Reload, let me tell you why I love it. Persona 3 Reload is a masterpiece, and that I am saying that is important. I do not like turn-based RPGs, or I guess I can't say that anymore because this year I've actually played 3 of them that I love, but historically I've been completely bored by the genre. I tend to dislike fantasy stories, and that's mostly where those games play, which is why the games that I've enjoyed have been the Like a Dragon series, and now Persona 3 Reload. And I've tried Persona before. I have a save halfway through Persona 5 Royal that I put down because I got too frustrated with it. Persona 3 Reload overcame all of that for me, and it did it rather quickly, and I know exactly why. Sure, the combat is much more interesting than your typical pick-up-move turn-based combat. It uses its type weaknesses, one-mores, shifts, and all-out attacks to make the battles feel more dynamic. And the calendar system, which forces you to prioritize among a bunch of different characters to befriend and stories to see, was absolutely core to my great experience. But neither of those are why this game worked when others haven't. The magic that made this Persona game work is because Persona 3 Reload is just less game than Persona 5 Royal. There's really 2 things that you can do in Persona 3 Reload. Battle up to the top of Tartarus, and spend time with your friends in the area around Gekukan High School. When I played Persona 5 Royal, I was really overwhelmed trying to learn the game's calendar system, figure out when and how I could progress various relationships, complete heavily themed and sometimes very long dungeons that the game calls palaces, and then also dungeon crawl through that game's secondary procedural dungeon, Mementos. Persona 3 Reload and the 3 previous versions of Persona 3 are much simpler, as they were the first time that Persona landed on this life sim and dungeon crawler formula. I often come on this channel and complain about games being too big, and this is a game that, while long, didn't overwhelm me with just how much there was to do and to learn. Without that restraint, I never would have found so much to love in Persona 3 Reload. Persona fans have taken issue with Persona 3 Reload for not containing everything present in all previous versions of the game. There's a female protagonist option available in Persona 3 Portable, for example, that many people miss in this edition. In fact, Persona 3 Reload is only the latest iteration of Persona 3 that improves in some ways, but leaves out some crucial aspect of the game that you might find in a previous version. But Persona 3 Reload is the one that I played. And I played it in large part because it had most of the things that were common to all of those previous versions of the game, as well as a ton of quality of life features brought over from Persona 5 Royal. For example, when school is over every day and you have the freedom to roam, you'll have messages on your phone from everyone whose social links could be progressed that afternoon. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, I got you in the next section. I genuinely don't know if I would have enjoyed the game as much if I didn't have those kinds of features. That feature specifically lets me focus on the parts of the game that I enjoy most. So really quick, let me tell you what Persona 3 Reload is and how it works for anyone that might not know. In Persona 3 Reload, you and all of the high school students living in your dormitory are members of an organization called SEES. All of you have the ability to use personas, which are manifestations of each character's inner self. Functionally, they're basically Pokemon, and honestly, I forget which of those came first, but Dragon Quest came before them. You, the main character, are special, of course, and can cycle through a bunch of different personas. Every other member of your party just gets one. Your persona dictates the actions that you can take in battle, and has this really cool looking physical form that shows up in all of these battle animations. In Persona 3, every night at the stroke of midnight, the dark hour begins. Everything goes green, electronics stop working, and every person is transmogrified into a black coffin. Everyone except Persona users, of course. The world has been plagued by something called apathy syndrome. You'll see people slumped over, standing in the middle of the city, mumbling to themselves. More and more people are affected as we get closer to each full moon. It's on you and your friends to climb Tartarus, this giant tower that appears over Gekukan High School every dark hour, and fight shadows in hope of ending the dark hour and apathy syndrome with it. During the day, when you're not fighting your way through an endless hell dungeon, you go to school and you hang out with your friends. The game operates on this calendar system where there are usually 3 or so blocks of time: daytime, after school, and evening, with some variation. After school, or during the day when there isn't school, you can explore the city. You might buy supplies or meet up with other characters to progress their stories, which the game calls social links. And in the evening, certain shops and social links are unavailable, but then other options open up to you as well. Or you can use the nighttime to visit Tartarus. Brendan Bigley put this much more eloquently in his review over at Wavelengths.
Nights spent climbing the seemingly infinite Tower of Tartarus are occasional, otherworldly skirmishes sandwiched between exams and days spent playing games at the arcade. The human experience is all-encompassing, and sometimes everything feels like navigating a tower of nightmares.
The best parts of Persona 3 Reload to me are the quiet ones. A little over halfway through my playthrough, a dog named Koromaru joined my party. Earlier in the game, I learned that Koromaru's owner, a priest at a nearby shrine, had passed. I would sometimes see Koro visiting the shrine and waiting there, grieving the priest. For plot reasons, Koromaru ends up coming to live with all of the main characters in the student dormitory the game uses as its home base. And every once in a while, there would be these scenes where Koromaru just wants to sit next to the steps of the building and see who passes by. People from the neighborhood come to check on him. An old man stops by to play shogi. Sometimes we go on short adventures with someone on the street. But mostly, we just sit and talk to people in the neighborhood. Koromaru is the heart of my time with Persona 3. So often I would have these nights where I had a few things that I could choose from. Maybe it might be beneficial to go to Tartarus and clear a few floors, or cook a meal with one of the other party members for some social progression and battle items. But instead, I would choose to watch TV with Koromaru, or brush him in the shared lounge of the dormitory. Sure, these tasks also had some benefit to the game mechanically, but that wasn't why I was there. Especially after I'd already maxed out my academic stat. Koromaru is a character laser-focused to tug at my specific heart. Sure, he's a dog, and dogs are cute. I love my dog and would be lying if I didn't say that's a part of it. She sat on my lap a good portion of the time I was playing this game. But also, Koromaru is vulnerable, emotionally and physically. It's dangerous for him to join the students living in Iwatodai dormitory in this fight, but he is steadfast in his commitment to his friends and eager to help. Better yet, he is an integral part of the community these people make up. And you know I love a story about community. If I asked most of my friends who their favorite Persona 3 social link was, I bet that they'd say the couple in the bookstore. Bunkichi and Mitsuko own Bookworms, a store in Iwatodai Strip Mall next to the dorm. If you wander in, you'll find a couple of very kind old people who are concerned about a particular persimmon tree at your high school. I don't want to say much more about these two. Just know that this was the first social link that I maxed out, and I adored the connection that my character formed with them. It's a kind of non-familial parental relationship that I personally am very familiar with. On my last day, right before the final battle, I visited Bookworms, and I imagined saying goodbye. I just love these two stories so much. One of my favorite characters in the game is Bebe, a French exchange student who you meet up with in the home ec room. He and the player character are the only two members of the Gekukan High School Fashion Club. Bebe is a sweet guy. He's obsessed with Japan and is simply happy that he has someone to talk to in Japanese. Nearly all of his social links are just the two of you sewing together, talking about how his family paid for him to be here and how he wants to stay here forever. Because I simply couldn't see these two hanging out any other way, I started to treat these as little dates. When you reach the end of Bebe's social link, he stops just shy of confessing his love to you. But I knew what he meant. These two are in love. Well, someone might have something to say about that. Yuko is the manager of the track team. If you pursue her social link, the two of you will end up coaching some local kids to win this informal race against some older kids. They start to tease you and call you boyfriend and girlfriend, and over time, that starts to be more and more true. Yuko's voice actor, Shelby Young, is delivering the best performance in the video game, and even if you don't choose her romance option, I found her difficult to ignore because of that performance. Of the romance options available to the main character, she's the most relatable. The game didn't give me the romance options I actually wanted, so it had to be Yuko. Another character who's tied to joining the track team is Mamoru Hayase, a track star from another local school. You meet him after a race, and then he invites you to hang out with him at the Iwatodai Strip Mall. As you get to know Hayase, you'll learn that despite being the star athlete who is presumably high status, he's actually struggling to help his mother take care of his siblings since his father died 5 years ago. Hayase puts a lot of pressure on himself to do well in track. His success so far has led to sponsorships and gifts from nearby businesses. He often eats free at the strip mall, for example. These things allow him to help his family to survive, but he wants to do more. He also just wants to be a kid, and at times is rightly upset that he has to think about anything else. I loved hanging out in Iwatodai eating takoyaki with Hayase. I hope his family is doing okay. Now, I've said that I don't like turn-based RPGs, and one aspect of those games that I tend to hate is the procedural dungeon. It was my least favorite part of Persona 5 Royal, and even in Yakuza Like a Dragon, a game that I can't fully even describe how much I love, it was the thing that I avoided doing until the game required it of me. So you'd think that the Persona game where climbing through Tartarus is literally all of the combat wouldn't be for me. But I found a few things to love in Tartarus. The first is that Persona's combat is so fluid that you can sometimes knock out a mob in seconds. If you already know their weaknesses and have a varied enough party, that can even be most of your encounters. Later in the game, you're also given more tools to make that easier. You get an ability at one point that lets you scan an enemy for its weaknesses in case your random spamming of attacks didn't help you identify those already. But also, I found that sometimes my best bet was just to avoid fighting at all. Especially on easy, where I didn't need to be too particular about my character levels. I like the combat here, but if I just wasn't in the mood, skipping it was totally valid. You're eventually able to use the jamming ability to make it so the shadows in the dungeon don't notice you unless you initiate combat. Especially near the end of a session where I just wanted to get to the next border floor and log off for the night, I could clear 3 or 4 floors this way and play the way that I wanted to. I get that some people feel that Tartarus is repetitive and grueling. It is those things, I won't pretend otherwise. But I found it kind of meditative. And if it got too annoying, I had this whole in-game month to complete each set of 20 or so floors. I grew to enjoy Tartarus. I'd usually try to clear it in a couple of nights per month, one near the beginning of the month and one right before the full moon and that month's boss fight. Persona 3 Reload lets me take the parts that I enjoy and then ignore the rest. I wouldn't want to min-max Persona, making sure that I complete social links with every character, or focusing extremely hard on the details of Persona weaknesses and fusions. That's not the way I want to enjoy a video game at all. and at least on easy, Persona 3 Reload didn't make me. For the most part, that's how it goes. You do the things in the game that you want to do, and you ignore the rest. The game doesn't punish you for treating it that way. But occasionally, there's something annoying that I just can't avoid. I quit playing Persona 5 Royal for 2 reasons. The first of those was gameplay. I didn't like the game's palaces, and I didn't like that I also had to crawl through mementos, like we talked about earlier. But I also took issue with a lot of that game's writing. Specifically, how its women, queer people, and children were characterized and sexualized. Persona 5's main party call themselves the Phantom Thieves, and one of the earliest members of the Phantom Thieves is Ann, codename Panther. Ann is 16, and she's American-Japanese. I only bring that up because the characters use her mixed ethnicity as a reason to sexualize her. Her battle outfit when the Phantom Thieves infiltrate the game's palaces is this tight red leather catsuit, complete with whip and a mask with ears. The entire story about how the Phantom Thieves make their way to the second palace in the game is predicated on Ann posing nude for an art student who eventually joins your party. This is something the boys on the team are audibly aroused by. And I get it. That's realistic. In that situation, I don't trust teenage boys to have any other behavior. But I do expect adults to not be writing video games where this is a scenario that their characters would be a part of. Persona 5's mascot character is named Morgana. Morgana would tell you that he's not a cat, but for our purposes, he basically is. In fact, in the real world, he just looks like a cat and the leads can talk to him. And then when the Phantom Thieves are in a dungeon, he has this weird kind of anthropomorphic form that just reads as cartoon cat. Large parts of this story are dedicated to him finding out who he actually is and learning how to have meaningful friendships with the rest of the Phantom Thieves. But the thing that sticks out to me when I think about Morgana is that he is so horny for Ann. He has so many battle lines and dialogue moments that are just fawning over her, or worse, getting upset out of some gross sense of ownership of her. And I get it. He's a cat. She's Panther. It's all very cute and funny. But sometimes it just goes too far. One of the many times that I have put down Persona 5 Royal thinking that I'd never come back was when in just this random scene, Ann bent over and both Morgana and Ryuji made a show of trying to look up her skirt. These things just happen, and they yank me right out of any immersion that I might be feeling in the story. Hell, we meet Ann in a situation where a teacher is taking advantage of her sexually, and the game absolutely tackles that difficult topic in a way that, on its own, I think, is done well. But then, a scene or two later, she's being ogled by these characters who are supposedly her best friends. It really undercuts any of the game's earnestness in addressing such a difficult topic. There's an infamous scene in the original version of Persona 5 and also a slightly changed version in Persona 5 Royal where 2 gay men approach Joker and Ryuji. These are very feminine, flamboyant men, and the whole scene is kind of meant to be played as a joke. In the original version, they basically assault Ryuji, and they drag him away while he screams for them to let him go. In Persona 5 Royal, this is played as a misunderstanding that he wants to do drag, but can't admit it. They still take him away without his consent, only the implication this time is not of assault, but of just putting him in a dress, I guess. Later, when the Phantom Thieves go on a beach day, a Persona staple, these guys reappear. They say they want to make Ryuji a starlet. He runs off after saying that he, quote, wasn't feeling what they wanted him to feel. Now, I love gay people, and I love femme gay men. I love being queer. I love all the ways that people can be queer. My issue with these characters is not that they're feminine. It's that they're clearly written by a straight person who sees that femininity as a weakness. They're written by a person who fears the feminine within themselves. Playing Persona 3 Reload, though, it's clear to me that P Studio has learned a few things since Persona 5 Royal. There's an infamous scene in previous versions of Persona 3 where, on another beach trip, the guys meet this woman that they're trying to hit on. Then, one of them notices a hair on her chin, before they all freak out and leave her there. The implication, and explicit intention of the scene, is that they've discovered that she's a trans woman. It's cheap, bad, gross-out trans panic humor that isn't funny, and it's been removed from this version of the game. The woman is now just a conspiracy theorist that weirds the guys out and makes them leave. Many people have pointed out that while this does make things slightly better, what P Studio have actually done here is remove a trans character from the video game. Atlas has a long history of misrepresenting queer people in their games. Again, I can't speak to most of it firsthand, and you should go watch Is Persona Gay if you want to get a more detailed view on that topic. As for me, I wonder just how much work it would have been just to get it right. Queer people are asked to be happy with the narratives that straight men are comfortable with. When we get gays or trans people, they are too often punchlines. The French sewing geek Bebe isn't necessarily gay. I have to headcanon that relationship. Akechi and Joker didn't actually go on several little cafe dates in Persona 5 Royal. That was just a fun thing I cooked up in my head. I must always settle for less, because the game was not written by or for people like me. That we queer folks enjoy it is just a side effect. The whole trope of the boys in these games going to the beach to hit up babes or whatever is old and annoying and uninteresting, but it's the way that teenagers behave. I just wish if we were going to do this, that the people responsible for writing these scenes could write trans people without making them the butt of the joke. And I also wish that these games didn't have the adult women these guys are hitting on encouraging them. Teenagers dating adults, especially teachers, is weirdly common in Persona 3 and Persona 5. 4 of Joker's romance options in Persona 5 Royal are adults. Persona 3 Reload has multiple instances of this, but the one that immediately got on my nerves was the Magician social link with Kenji Tomochika. The earliest parts of this social link are just Kenji telling you about his crush and how he's going to ask her out. But then you learn that his crush is a teacher, and not only that, she's interested in him. This social link leads to him talking about marrying this woman. And the whole time, there's no way to say, hey man, isn't this kind of weird? Because every step in the social link must result in a number arbitrarily going up that says you've grown closer to the character. Telling your friend that he might want to cool down and consider that he's being groomed doesn't fit the vibe. The social link that hurt me the most personally while playing Persona 3 Reload was the Moon Arcana, another high schooler who's introduced to us as Chubby Student. And I'll be real with you and say that as I write this, I could not tell you this kid's name without looking it up, because the moment that I realized what was going on, I completely avoided him. If you go to the mall near the school during the day, you'll see Chubby Student sitting on a bench, double fisting some kind of hot dog or something. He tells you at one point that he wears his school uniform every day because none of his other clothes fit. In fact, his shirt is tucked into his pants, but the front is spread open just a bit to show part of his belly. Something that, as a fat person, I'm very familiar with and self-conscious of avoiding. Every message this kid sends to you is about food or being a gourmet king. The message title that kept making me roll my eyes was, all caps, meat, meat, veggie meat. This kid's entire personality is eating, burping, visibly straining against the buttons of his shirt and hating vegetables. And his story might go somewhere. It might have a really good ending. But I don't care, because what this game has shown me up front is that it thinks I'm gross as hell and obsessed with food, and it's not on me to meet the game halfway. A lot of times when I criticize Persona or Japanese video games generally, people will come back with explanations about Japanese culture and its differences from American culture. And I do see the ways that viewing a Japanese piece through a Japanese lens can be important. But when it comes to these issues, I'm going to be real with you. I don't care. I just want the adults who are writing these games to make better decisions, no matter where they're from. It's not an excuse. Queer people deserve the same respect in Japan as they do in the United States. Fat people deserve to be treated as humans in Japan the same way they do across the rest of the world. I think sometimes people who don't know how to critique things and continue to love them can rely too heavily on culture as a way to avoid difficult conversations. I do believe that when talking about these things, it's important to think about what the game thinks about the characters who are doing those things. Kenji's a teenager. Teenagers have crushes on people they shouldn't, but the game didn't need me to encourage him. That was a choice the writers made. And Junpei is a teenage boy. Teenagers are gross and don't have boundaries sometimes. Bad behavior isn't excusable, but having a character in a story that acts that way does make sense. What doesn't is mechanically ignoring the problem, either through dialogue options or actual game progression. Persona 3 Reload does improve on the missteps from previous entries in the series. We're not seeing the blatant homophobia that we saw in Persona 5 Royal, even if we did lose the same-sex relationships available via Persona 3 Portable's female protagonist. The transphobic scene was removed, even if the trans character was also removed. And largely, I will say that this game calms down on the sexualization of young characters. But I can't even say that the game got better without qualifying that statement. And that's the problem with Persona. I want a Persona game that I can recommend without caveat. I have recommended games on this channel that I had reservations about. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim comes to mind as a game that I love, but it has a lot of caveats. I'm not afraid to tell a person that they should play something and also warn them at the same times about things they might not enjoy. But occasionally, I do feel bad about making those recommendations. In fact, one instance of this happened on one of my favorite podcasts ever made, Asynchronous. The show's over now, but you can go back and listen to them play one game a season. They chose these games based on having overwhelming amounts of recommendations from their friends. Kim and AJ chose 13 Sentinels as their game for their third season. And I remember sitting in a Best Buy parking lot waiting eagerly to hear if they liked the game or not. And they did. But then, in one episode, they played through a scene in the game that I had completely forgotten about. Something that made me uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that I'd remembered to tell anyone about it. It's a scene very similar to the original Persona 5 version of the gay guys harassing Ryuji. Just like in that scene, there is a person who doesn't want to be there, there's a sexual undertone, and there's a lack of consent. There is also a queer character being written as a predator. Hearing Kim talk about this scene on the episode made me feel awful for recommending this game to so many people. Kim and AJ didn't choose to play it just off of my recommendation alone. They're both adults capable of encountering something like that and handling it gracefully. But I was still among the chorus of voices that didn't do a good job of warning them of what was ahead. And honestly, that's kind of how I felt every time Persona 5 Royal would make me so angry that I'd stop playing for a year or more. I felt let down by the people who had warned me, because in the immediate moments after encountering those things, it didn't feel like the warning was enough. At risk of attributing the sins of the Persona series to one man, something that I believe is fundamentally false, I want to introduce you to Katsura Hashino. He is the director of many Persona games, from the original Persona 3 through the original release of Persona 5, with several other spin-offs in the greater Shin Megami Tensei franchise in between. Here's a couple things that you should know about Hashino. In an interview about Persona 3, Hashino said, "I have never successfully forged a true friendship with a girl in real life." And then, when asked about comments from another writer on the games claiming that he's the source of, quote, all those old-fashioned jokes, he said, "Yeah, guilty as charged. All of those were mine." After finishing Persona 5, Hashino and a group of developers left P Studio to form a new studio, Studio Zero. At time of writing, Studio Zero released their first game, Metaphor ReFantazio, last week. It's basically Persona, but fantasy. I don't love fantasy RPGs, as I've said, but a lot of people do. And Metaphor sold 1 million copies on the first day. I have a physical copy sitting on my coffee table right now. By all reports, Metaphor doesn't contain all the gross stuff that I've talked about in this video. Maybe that's because of the fantasy setting, and the story's nuanced focus on racism doesn't leave room for that kind of thing. Or maybe it's because Metaphor doesn't have a romance mechanic like every Persona game. Who knows? I'll play it. I've played the demo, even though it is fantasy. But the thing that I'm hopeful for is Persona 6. It's a game that we know is coming at this point. Atlus keeps teasing that its signature color will be green, the way that Persona 3's was blue, and Persona 4's was yellow, and Persona 5's was red. We know that it started development around the same time that Hashino left P Studio to go make Metaphor. So while I, again, must remind you and myself that one person is not responsible for the sins of Persona, I can't help but have a hope for Persona 6 that's free of them, with no caveat. In the meantime, I'm excited for Necrosoft Games' tactics RPG, Demon School, which comes out next year, has a similar calendar and relationship mechanics, and crucially, is set in a university. If we can't get a perfect Persona from Atlus, maybe we can get it somewhere else. With all of this said, take this last bit as you will. I very much recommend Persona 3 Reload. It is spectacular in character, mechanics, and narrative. It is a triumph in the way that it simulates the everyday comforts of being alive, while also delivering a realistic portrayal of the hard parts. It made me feel and cry and cheer, and it also just let me be when that was the right thing to do. But I also know that some of the things I've discussed here will be a deal breaker for many people, and hopefully this video helps you decide if that's the case. If you like this video, will you please give it a thumbs up on YouTube? And if you want to see more of this show, Flow State, a show about the games we get lost in, then you can subscribe to this channel. Also check out my other show here on the channel, Slow News Day, a games and tech news show without all the yelling. And for the real ones who want to support me monetarily, you can do that at ko-fi.com/Matt Horton. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.
I will.